Through our efforts, the boundary between the world and Shavarath disappeared entirely, just for a moment, and then that particular place. The device the Emerald Claw was building passed through the boundary, taking us with it, Dania interjected. Taking it with us, yes, and it was quickly destroyed by a raiding force of celestial beings. Good stories of adversaries, and in games of Dungeons & Dragons, these adversaries usually come in the form of monsters from the Monster Manual. So in this Library of Korranburg, we'll flip ahead to a couple of new pages in the book after starting at A and going through Z. This is the second installment of Monster Manual A to Z, so we're still very much in the A's. As before, we'll start the next sequential monster entry, look at how these monsters work within standard D&D, and a bit of their history in the game. Then dive into how Eberron iterates on its themes or changes them entirely. Then cover what sources within Eberron's canon will add the most if you want additional reading about their place within Eberron. Angels are the archetypical celestial creatures, servants of the fundamental forces of good in the D&D multiverse. Angels generally appear as winged humanoids who are beautiful to an unearthly degree. They come in a number of forms, powers, and sizes, and currently all of these forms within the 5th edition of D&D have feathered wings. Angels serve the gods of the good spectrum of alignment, and their physical bodies are formed from what is called the astral essence of those gods. Despite all non-fallen angels being exclusively lawful good, they do act as servants to all the gods of good. Thus, there is no issue for them to serve neutral good or chaotic good gods. A fallen angel is an angel that loses its path, usually due to an alignment shift. The most famous of which is probably Zariel, who fell so far she became a prince of hell. So that's angels on a base level. What kind of angels appear in 5th edition? The least powerful is the Diva. They're medium-sized and in their natural form have silvery skin and supremely lustrous hair. However, they do have a shape change ability and can assume many forms. Divas serve as divine messengers and agents for the gods outside of their home plane. However, they tend to only operate in the material plane and its echoes, the Shadowfell and the Feywild, when they do leave that home plane. The large-sized Planetar is next in power level. They're muscular, hairless, and green-skinned, with large wingspans. They are not just functionaries in the heavenly planes, they are soldiers and champions, and characterized as weapons of the gods. They enjoy nothing more than smiting the enemies of their gods, especially fiends. The most powerful order of angels are the Solar. They're not tied to a specific visual identity, other than being large-sized and gorgeous. They're powerful warriors and wield flying swords. However, most act directly as servants of the gods and don't get into combat. Many exist purely as contemplatives, resting and waiting for major cosmic crises before they join the action. Solars are the celestials that are equivalent to a demon lord or archfey in power, those largest powers of the planes that are not deities. In the core cosmology, it is believed that there are only 24 of them. Angels play a small role in a number of 5th edition adventures, and Zariel, the fallen angel, plays a big role in Baldur's Gate, Descent into Avernus. So that's how these angels were presented in the core books for 5th edition. What were they like in earlier editions? In early D&D, what is now most commonly called Basic D&D or 0th Edition, there were not any sort of angels included in the game until Dragon Magazine issue number 12. These angels were specific named creatures and not more general angelic beings, though these figures have been more or less dropped from the game. 5 Dragon issues later, more generic angels were introduced, but these were angels with names like Angel of Healing and Seraphim, not really antecedents of the current angels that would propagate into future editions. Even when we get to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st Edition, there were no angels in the core monster manual. Their first appearance was also in a Dragon magazine. Issue number 35's angels came under names like Archangel, Dominion, Powers, Thrones, and Virtues. These versions don't continue past this article, but keep an eye on them for later. Finally, Dragon number 63 and 64 brought in the general angelic forms of today, including the Solar, Planetar, 3 forms of Diva, the Monadic, Movanic, and Astral, as well as some others, which exist in some later editions but aren't directly relevant to this coverage. These forms were reprinted in AD&D's Monster Manual 2, and are very similar to the presentation of the current edition of their form and power. These are the forms that continued into 2nd edition AD&D and were included in 2 of the Monstrous Compendium loose leaf releases. Monstrous Compendium Volume, Outer Planes Appendix, and the first Planescape Monstrous Compendium Appendix. The only major thematic difference between these and the 1st edition angels were that they were now known as Asimon and not officially known as angels. This is, of course, where Aasimar got their name. 3rd and 3.5 editions reduced the selection of angels in the monster manual, so only the astral form of the Diva, the Solar, and Planetar were included. But they finally made it into a proper monster manual. The other forms of Deva were in the Fiend Folio. That includes the Monadic Deva, which is the Deva form that is closer to the modern one. And of course, the Aasimon name was dropped completely from all appearances, unlikely to return. 4th edition D&D included a structural change to the basic cosmology, going from the traditional Great Wheel over to the World Axis model. Angels' place in that cosmology, their role and appearance changed completely. Instead of the champions of the gods of good from a small collection of outer planes, they became servants of all of the gods of the astral realms, serving both good, evil, and otherwise. A collection of different types of angels in 4th edition appear in many of the edition's monster books, but there is a good collection in the Monster Manual and Monster Manual 2, where they varied greatly in combat roles. The angels were all faceless and inhuman-looking winged humanoids. The name Deva was also reused in 4th edition, not on an angel type, but in that edition's version of the Aasimar. For 5th edition, they reverted to their more classic form, and the 4th edition changes turned out to be an odd, veiled experiment. Before leaving the topic of a previous edition's angels, we should look at other celestials that didn't make it to the current day, but still affected the modern angels of Eberron. In 3rd and earlier editions, there were additional angelic creatures which were not called angels. For our purposes, the most important of these were the Archons. While many appeared similar to the actual angels, they were separated by their innate alignment, making them lawful good celestials. Angels were neutral good at the time. Archons had more diverse physical forms than the standard angels, most notably the dog-headed Hound Archon and the non-humanoid Lantern Archon. There were celestials for chaotic good as well, the Eladrin, which were Fey-like celestials, and the neutral good celestials were the wingless, animal-headed Cardinals. In most cases, apart from the Eladrin, which went in a completely different direction, all of these celestials' roles were reassigned to angels in 5th edition. And when working with older Eberron material, it's generally safe to transpose Archons and Cardinals over to Angels, as very little detailed information was written in Eberron material about those creatures anyway. Let's look at Angels themselves within Eberron now. The biggest change between Angels in the core D&D cosmology and Angels in Eberron is not something about the Angels themselves. It's in how the planes are different. Going from the Great Wheel with alignment-based quadrants to the planetary model represented by the Orrery and purely thematic planes. Compound that with Eberron's distant gods, who don't physically appear in the planes, unlike the manifestations that exist in the Forgotten Realms and similar worlds. Both these greatly change how Angels interact with the world. In the Forgotten Realms, any random Deva in his service could, on occasion, be able to speak with Moradin, or at least have seen him or heard him speak. Thus they would get to know their god's opinions and would directly know his will. Not so in Eberron. It's not possible to hear a deity speak, as they are distant, and there is no literal manifestation of them in any accessible plane. Despite that, many of the angels do serve one of the gods and have faith that they truly follow their commandments and can speak authoritatively for a topic relating to their religion if they are contacted with commune or a similar spell. Members of the Sovereign Host Pantheon each have representations of their faith in the form of angels on one or more planes. When conversing with those angels, if you ask them which god they serve, the answer sounds different depending on the listener's personal knowledge and beliefs. A giant of Zendrick might hear them speak of Orlon, a Nondarian, Orion, and someone with no knowledge of the host might hear Law and Knowledge as the name of the god they serve. So in some ways, they are in service to the universal concepts the god represents. But if you ask for clarification about this fact either to the angel or to a devout priest of the faith, they would both point out that there is no difference between Law and Knowledge and Orion. Some angels serve other ideals or are devoted to concepts and not the host directly. But despite that, in the popular consciousness of Eberron, they are still associated with religion. Angels appear in religious art like stained glass for both the Sovereign Host and Silver Flame alike. Angels provide spiritual advice to followers of both faiths, and can serve as patron to Celestial Pact warlocks, or the source of the Divine Soul sorcerer origin associated with either religion. Angels are there to stand in for the gods themselves, to answer divine divination spells, and do come when called by a cleric's summon spells. It's been said that Jayla Duran, the Young Keeper, and High Cardinal Crozin, the two top priests of the Silver Flame, are both able to bring in angelic assistance in battle. Angels do appear in religious art, but because of their symbolic nature, they also appear in more secular art as well. Angels are the subject matter of sculptures, plays, paintings, and many other forms of art. This cultural influence means a few things. Their trusted role means that even the gatekeepers, the druidic order dedicated to protecting the natural world and fighting off any extraplanar creatures, don't go after angels when they do enter the material plane. They may be outsiders, but there are targets more likely to cause damage that need to be considered first. Eberron is often cast in shades of gray, so angels as the ultimate symbol of goodness stand out as symbols on a personal level for the people of the world, and a metaphysical level in the planes and for the state of magic. That means angelic artifacts, especially shed bits of their bodies, are known to work as magical reagents to use for spells and magic item components. Strands of angels' hair and feathers, especially, are trade goods for powerful beings like dragons, rakshasas, and other fiends, and possibly other great powers of the planes. These goods will then be used as focuses for powerful spells of goodness or sacrificed in terrible rituals. All of this adds up to angels being trusted by everyday folk, But that also means all kinds of evil creatures who are looking to gain a following usually present themselves as some sort of angelic being to further a scheme, gain cultists, or otherwise enact their nefarious plan, at least until they are eventually revealed to be a quarry, fiend, Dalgir, or whatever else. Like in the core worlds of D&D, Deva are the angels most likely assigned to visit material plane, but it's possible that any person you meet in your travels might be a Deva, Planetar, or Solar in disguise, with the odds going up within Sharn, where there is a manifest connection between the city and the plane of Cyrania. The Deva would most likely be there to observe. A Planetar would be there in their role as a divine weapon, likely hunting some fiend, and a Solar travels freely through the multiverse, but usually only in great need, so their presence is an ill omen. All of these angels may have the shape-changing ability that are ascribed only to the Deva in the monster manual. The Deva is still by far the most likely encountered in disguise. Another place where a disguised Deva looking to oppose or observe evil might be found is in Ashtakala, in the Demon Wastes, where they can keep track of the plans of some of the greatest evils in the multiverse, the Overlords and their Prakutu in the Lords of Dust. Solars and Planetars are much more likely to provide guidance from afar, like nominating a champion, such as warlocks or sorcerers. But it's the nature of the planes themselves, and not the manifest zones or planar travel that influence angels the most. The planes of Eberron aren't equally divided among alignment lines. Instead, they are manifestations of other natural forces and universal themes. Thus, the traditional celestial and fiendish creatures that are divided by alignment are spread out among many different planes based on how they fit in with that environment and the motifs of that plane. The standard monster manual version of angels aren't exactly used in any of these planes. All of them have some changes to their abilities, appearance, personalities, and in some cases, even their alignment. Let's go through each of these plane by plane and talk about the unique angels of that world. On Dawn V, angels are able to keep their most natural role and are able to assist planar travelers and be helpful in the pursuit of justice, as long as you're following the rules. It is one of the few places in the multiverse where you might see an angel and a fiend working side by side, without violence erupting, as the fiends are a needed element of the plane to represent the repressive side of the law. Even so, angels do retain their normal, lawful good alignment, though their appearance changes so they have metallic features, like their wings or skin, and may have other constructed elements similar to inevitables or modrons. Divas can serve many roles here, including sages poring through the infinite archives, legal counsel for an inevitable tribunal, or ministers and magistrates assigned to the duty of enforcing specific laws at a local level. Planetars act as high ministers, guardians for important gates and portals around the plane. A planetar usually sits as a judge on major tribunals held by the Hall of Justice, alongside a Kolarut Inevitable and an Amnesu Devil, and the decisions made in these trials can have great effects on Eberron's multiverse. There are only a total of 13 Solars from Dawn V, one for each of the outer planes. Each are named based on the plane that they oversee, such as Hazariel, the Solar of Serenia. They are there to oversee their plane from the Panopticon and administer justice on a cosmic scale. The highest chamber of the Panopticon is theirs, and they are bound there observing. They can only act when a legitimate authority from the plane asks for help from them. Angels are one of the many denizens of the Amaranthine City and other glimmering crystalline spires on Irian, the plane of light and hope. So, their natural lawful good nature fits well. In general, angels of Irian appear in a form where their bodies are luminescent and their wings and halos are made of pure light. Divas on this plane often change the rest of their physical form based on the specific role that they serve, taking the form of knights, scholars, or whatever functionary role that the diva is needed for at any specific time. The planetars of Irian hosts of angels take the roles of champions and ministers, serving the downtrodden who make their way to the plane. Solars of Irian are not the highest powers of Irian. Instead, that title goes to the architects, the pure embodiment of one of the themed layers of the plane. However, each architect keeps a solar by their side to act for them. Shavarath, the Eternal Battleground. The plane that focuses on a never-ending three-sided war between devils, demons, and angels is obviously home to angels. All immortal beings of this plane belong to one of the armies vying to gain advantage in the war. These armies are known as legions, and the majority of all angels of this plane belong to the Legion of Justice. The legions are broken into smaller groups called cohorts, which are themselves built out of centuries, which contain 100 individual warriors. Each level of the army is tied to a representative theme that fits within the concept of just war, like mercy, protecting innocence, and many more. Angels of Shavarath have their personality and alignment board tied to their legion, cohort, or centuries themes more than anything else. So an angel of the smaller Legion of Freedom, for example, will likely be chaotic good instead of the standard lawful good. All of the angelic beings of Shavarath wear full armor, including helms, making it quite difficult to identify the species or gender of any one angel. However, it is generally known that most centuries are led by a planetar, and cohorts are led by solars. You might not have expected angels of any kind to appear in the plane that is a constant raging inferno, but Furnia is more than just pure fire. It covers other concepts surrounding fire, the warmth of home, of love, and the light that keeps shadows at bay. Divas with wings of flame and fiery halos are here to assist and comfort travelers when they can. Stronger angels don't generally manifest on Furnia, except in very rare and unique cases. Cyranian angels are the celestials most residents of Corvair would picture when you say the word angel, especially with the plane's connection to the cultural center that is Sharn, at least their average visuals. However, the actual angels of Cyrania are not the moral champions that are found on other planes. They're actually neutral. They are scholars and observers of the universe. All of these angels are bound to a domain of knowledge, and that domain influences their interest in research, as well as their physical form. An angel from the domain of the sea might have fish scales or wings formed of water. Angels of Cyrania are divided into 4 orders. These orders are generally aligned with one of the species of angels in the monster manual, except for the lowest order. This order is somewhat confusingly just angels. These angels are generally non-combatants and have little need for combat statistics, as they are not able to become aggressive, both by their own nature and by the absolute peace of the Cyranian realm's essence. These least angels act as scribes and other functionaries for the greater celestials and visitors to the plane. The second tier are virtues, which are almost all diva. You may recall that virtues were one of the angel types named in the dropped initial introduction of angels in the first edition AD&D. And the higher tiers also borrow names from that dragon article. The virtues research and contemplate their domain, assisting higher-powered figures in gathering data, either directly or from records already held in the plane. They will speak with people from other planes directly for eyewitness counts, and are usually figures who will visit other planes to see events related to their domain unfold. Virtues have a name related to their domain, something like Hazari, Virtue of Nature, and act with guidance from a member of the next order, the Domains. Those are the planetars of Cyrania, who focus specifically on a domain of knowledge and take on very formal titles to reflect their importance in the planar hierarchy. An example could be a dominion called Tessaria, Angel of the Storm, Dominion of the Seventh Spire. Dominions use virtues as their eyes and hands, setting them as emissaries or using them as assistants, but generally don't do much more than contemplate their domain themselves, other than the occasional discussion with visiting mortals who have unique perspectives on their subject matter. Despite this, they are still powerful combat angels. Indeed, they have spellcasting and combat abilities altered based on their specific domain, but they will usually only engage if their home spire is under threat. The thrones are the greatest of the angels of Cyrania, thus Solars. They do not take names, but are just known as the throne of their domain. They have deep knowledge about their domain and nearly everything that is involved with dominions under their domain. However, they rarely act, despite their great power and special powers granted by their domain. Further, they have the power to revoke the ability to fly from those who gain it from the properties of the plane. Even so, they only act if their domain is threatened or corrupted. Generally, angels aren't native to Mabar. Instead, they arrive on fragments of other planes that are transposed into Mabar to be slowly consumed. The longer they remain, the more the darkness of the plane suffuses their being, becoming dark angels, which could be of evil alignment. Little more has been written about these celestials, so it is up to the DM to expand on their mystery. Wherever the outer planes touch the material plane, the properties of the world are altered, and travel between both is generally easier. Known manifest zones where angels emerge are not well recorded in canon materials. We do know that they can shift over via one of the many reality storms called Okoroks in the Tishana tundra of northern Sarlona, and of course, Sharn, though many of the angels in Sharn have fallen and have become radiant idols. But DMs are free to add their own manifest zones as needed to work for their stories. There aren't a ton of named angelic figures that appear within Eberron canon. Most are just known by titles, with little detail available, if any at all, even if most of the details are up to the DM to fill in due to minimal existing particulars. I did leave out a few who are a little more than just an example name. Ortaniel is a Cyranian scholar studying the Draconic prophecy. He chronicles the stories of events critical to world history. His angelic species has not been specified, but he is quite powerful as he can act as a warlock's patron, but as he is named, he is likely to be a dominion near the top strength of that rank, and not a solar throne. And it's not been specified which spire is Ortaniel's home. Trissala is a celestial from the Legion of Justice, who, unlike most angels from Shavarath, also looks outside of the eternal struggle of that plane to events of the rest of the multiverse. He will guide those who fight for the cause of justice anywhere, and will empower mortals that might fight fiends who have left Shavarath to expand the eternal war beyond the plane. Like Ortaniel, the angelic species of Trissala is not specified, but he is likely from the upper echelons of Justice Command, so probably a Solar or Planetar. Hazariel is the Donvian Solar that observes and administers Cyrania, which means they are in charge of exiling fallen angels from Cyrania to become radiant idols, and to assist in other matters if requested by an authority of that plane. Azazar is another Solar of Donvi, whose planar purview is Zoriat. They've watched the plane since time immemorial, but have never been called to action in the realm of madness. Tyrala is the Donvian Solar Overseer of Dalcor. She has been missing since the Giants knocked Dalcor out of its normal axis. She went to investigate, but has never returned to Donvi. When I make these types of videos, I do everything I can to ensure that they conform to current Eberron canonical materials, while bringing in as much material from earlier editions which haven't been directly contradicted. But sometimes there are still compelling ideas within those discarded pieces of lore that can inspire you in building your version of Eberron. I want to cover those now. The 4th edition planar axis was a huge structural change to the multiverse of Eberron, as I covered earlier, bringing in, or some might say, shoehorning elements of the core multiverse into Eberron. The elemental chaos was added and moved Kythri, Rhysia, and Fernia into that cosmological region, with most of the other planes going into the upper astral region. All of these now astral realms featured angels, serving gods, who may actually reside there. I'll get back to that implication in a moment, but I want to examine this new plane that appeared for the first time with the 4th edition planar diagram, the 9 Hells of Beator. This, of course, is the classic hell dimension from D&D, with archdevils each ruling a more and more horrific lair, and at the center, the top devil, Asmodeus. While Asmodeus did not retain his godhood from the core Points of Light setting, he is still served by angels. Thus, you could find angels serving evil, even if they officially remained unaligned. Eberron's Beator was primarily covered in Dragon Magazine number 408, and was erased from canon as of the first 5th edition Eberron publication, Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron. It still featured the World Axis planar chart, but Beator had been removed. While it was definitely the correct choice to remove this edition, there are some interesting ideas to explore there, either in the concept of evil angels beyond the odd few in Midbar, or possibly the idea of a foreign plane entering into Eberron's multiverse. 4th edition also brought in another way to explore the concept of evil angels, because all angels served all the gods. To this end, the gods of the Sovereign Host and the Dark Six each had angelic representation on one of the planes of the Astral Sea. Boldrai and Orion's angels appeared on Donvi. Dolora and Doldorn's angels roamed Irion. The trio of Onatar, Eladra, and Kolkaron's angelic host were found in Cyrania. Erwai, Balinor, the Fury, and the Devourer's angels were found in Lamania. And finally, the Mockery, the Shadow, and the Keeper had angels within Midbar. There are some issues with some of the choices of plane and god pairings, and the implication in the Eberron's Player's Guide that the gods themselves might be hidden somewhere in the astral realms undermines an important aspect of the setting. But there might also be some interesting stories buried somewhere in this now non-canon content. That's for you to decide. So before we close out on angels, let's talk sources. Like where you should go further to expand your knowledge of angels once you decide to include them in your character background or run them in an adventure. I'll quickly animate books, filling with color to illustrate the usefulness of the sources for angelic topics. Eberron campaign setting. The original setting has only the barest mention of angels, and even then, some of that is outmoded due to the dropping of Archons and other Celestials in the current edition. Eberron Player's Guide. The Eberron's Player's Guide has only the barest mention of angels, only saying they're from the astral realm. Eberron Campaign Guide. While it has more about angels in it than the 3.5 setting book, the guide's information is too influenced by the change to cosmology to be generally useful, so only some small elements are still relevant. Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron. The lack of a plane section hurts this book's usefulness, and despite being a 5th edition book, it still refers to Archons, which hurts it further. Eberron, Rising from the Last War. The plane section is the best we've seen in the main setting books, but at least now the switch from angels to Archons is clear. Overall, it's still short and incomplete, but not the worst starting point. Morgrave Miscellany. Morgrave Miscellany was a book released between Wayfarers and Rising, and it inherited the Archon issue from the former. However, it does have good sections on the approach to angels from the perspective of player characters, especially as Warlock patrons. 2 of the angel NPCs came from this source, but otherwise the material is pretty thin. Exploring Eberron. Exploring Eberron provided the bulk of the details regarding angels for this video. It is essential to rounding out their themes. The rest. All of these briefly involve angels. However, some just have them in encounter tables or similar. Mention angels as cultural references or for their trade goods, or fiends and other evil creatures posing in angels for their reputation, or finally, just representing information available elsewhere as well. Don't pursue any of these solely as sources on angels, even if there is a little material there. I believe the biggest takeaway you should gain from all this information is the biggest consideration is what plane an angel is from, and making that decision before you bring them into the plot, or figuring out which plane's angels fit the themes of the adventure you intend to run first. Also consider that for the most part, angels aren't especially interested in the concern of mortals except for when they intersect their own interests or domains. Angels of Shafarath aren't going to suspend their fighting of fiends on their plane to help stop a reignition of the last war. The war they're fighting is far more important to them, so you'd need to compel them to assist via summon spell or the like, or the players would only be able to get advice from them. No combat aid. How have you used angels in your own Eberron game? Let us know all about it in the comments. So that's a lot of information, considering it's just a few pages of the monster manual. So instead of continuing into another monster, let's return the volume to the shelves of the Library of Korranburg for now. Next time on Eberron Archaeologist, I'll be giving my first impressions of the newest Eberron publication, Chronicles of Eberron. Get subscribed so you don't miss it. And check out Eberron Archaeologist on Instagram, and we're trying out Mastodon and Hive Social for channel news and whenever a video goes live.